Well, hi, and thanks for stopping by the Pellets and Pistons Airgun channel. Today we're going to give a little bit of love to the Walther LGU. Now, I don't know if you saw the previous video I did on this rifle where I just gave you a little bit of information about it shortly after I received it. One of my biggest complaints, in fact my only complaint with this rifle, is the trigger. The trigger is absolutely horrendous. It's got a heavy pull. It's up over 3 pounds. For a rifle like this that's designed for precision shooting, a trigger like that is just no good. Had a lot of creep. Also a big no-no when you're talking about a rifle of this quality. So what I've done is I've went ahead and ordered a Rowan trigger from Rowan Engineering out of the UK. These folks make an aftermarket trigger for this rifle. Here, I'll show you what it looks like. And this should make a difference. From what I've been told, it makes quite a bit of a difference. Now, while we've got it apart, we're going to go ahead and polish all of the bearing surfaces of the trigger, and then we're going to go ahead and install that Rowan trigger as well. So stick around, this ought to be a good one. And I want to thank you again for stopping by the Pellets and Pistons Airgun channel.
Warning: before we begin, this trigger tune is to be done by qualified gunsmiths, airgunsmiths, and individuals who have experience in trigger work. This should not be attempted by anyone without the proper experience and qualifications to work on the trigger system of a gun. If you should decide to attempt this procedure, you do so at your own risk. If done improperly, this procedure could cause a very unsafe situation where the gun can fire unexpectedly. It can also render the gun unusable. Do not attempt this if you are not qualified to do so.
So of course the first step is to remove the stock. I'll leave that up to you. From there you're going to remove the 2 pins at the rear of the action. You want to remove the smaller, more forward pin first. That's very important. Take the smaller pin out first. That's the one that's set closest to the front of the rifle. Once that pin is removed, you can go ahead and remove the second larger pin. And when you do, you're going to have all of the tension of the mainspring up against that punch. So do not pull that punch until you're ready to restrain the mainspring. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the gun up on its end and put some downward pressure against the rear of the receiver so that when I pull the punch, I can hold the tension of the mainspring from flying across the shop. From there, everything should slide right out of the gun, the trigger group as well as the mainspring itself. There are 2 screws on the left-hand side of the trigger clamshell that houses the trigger components. You'll need to remove both of those screws so that you can separate the top half of the clamshell to get access to the internals of the trigger group. Once the screws are out, you can carefully pry with your screwdriver along the edge of the clamshell in order to gently lift the top from the bottom half. Oftentimes when you do this, you'll pull many of the trigger parts with it because the pins will come off with the top half. But I'll show you how everything is arranged inside the trigger group so that you can put it back together if that should happen to you. So what I'm doing here is I'm marking where I'm going to be doing the polishing to show you exactly where the contact surfaces are on the trigger group and all of its components. I'll give you a little bit of a closer look. I'll pick this up and hold it in front of the camera for you. So here's the top where the rocking portion of the trigger mechanism contacts the main sear at the top. Forgive me, I don't know what these are called. And then the bottom portion of that rocking assembly meets up with the first sear. Also underneath that first sear where the trigger adjusting screws contact, we're going to polish there as well. So the next thing to do is to remove the components from the trigger clamshell.
This might be a good time to mention that this is not an instructional video for a novice to just go ahead and take apart the trigger assembly of his rifle. This is very touchy work, and if it's done wrong, it can result in a very unsafe condition as well as a gun that doesn't operate. So this should be done only by qualified people and not by your everyday novice. So this piece is the portion that we need to polish is the top, and we want to try to not change the contour. This is 400 grit wet or dry paper. From here I'm going to move on to 600 grit, and then finally we'll finish up with the Dremel tool and some polishing rouge just to put that final gloss on the polish. So we're going to repeat this process with all of the parts that we showed you in the earlier frame. Again, we're going to polish with 400 grit, and then I'll move on to 600 grit, and then finally we'll use the polishing wheel. Some people go a lot further with the wet or dry paper, all the way up to 12 and 1600 grit. I suppose I could have done that, but for time's sake I went ahead and stopped at 600 grit, and I'll tell you what a difference it makes in the trigger. I don't really think you need to go much further than that. For this application, what I'm doing is I'm wrapping the sandpaper around a very small sharpening stone. This gives me a nice firm solid piece that I can work with, and I can focus right on the contact point of this portion of the trigger group. Again, I don't know what these parts are called. I know that they're sears, but I don't know what the first one or the second sear or the and so on and so forth. You'll have to forgive me. We'll reverse that part, and we'll hit the other side of it, which also contacts that main sear, the one that actually engages with the piston rod. This is the underside of that bar or sear that the trigger acts directly against. And where the adjusting screws meet that bar, I'm polishing that surface there. The adjusting screws on the new trigger are highly polished. They're like mirror bright. And so I'm trying to get a similar finish on this piece as well. So you can see here, using the rouge with the Dremel tool, we'll buff that up to a very, very bright steel to reduce the friction of the trigger as it acts upon this bar. Here you can see the replacement Rowan trigger on the left compared to the original Walther trigger on the right. Notice there's two adjusting screws on the Rowan where there's only one on the Walther. Alright, it's time to reassemble. There's a couple of springs, but if you pay attention to what I'm doing here, and also you can look at a frame, I'm going to give you a very nice close-up later on in the video that you can freeze frame on for aiding yourself in reassembling the trigger group. But it's really not that difficult. There's a small spring that connects that main sear to the top of the trigger. A pair of needle nose pliers comes in very handy for installing that spring. Now, as far as adjusting the trigger goes, I adjusted the trigger set screw on the Rowan trigger to about the same setting as the one on the original Walther trigger. That was my starting point. From there you can adjust in or out with the 2 screws and try to fine-tune the trigger. But I found that I needed to make no adjustment whatsoever to it. It was perfect as soon as I finished the job. So I guess I got really lucky. You may have to fiddle with your adjusting screws to get the same results. What I've done right here is I've just picked up a very small washer that you want to be careful you don't lose. That sits over the pin that the trigger rotates on the left-hand side of the trigger, and that just gives it a bearing surface to help keep it moving freely. A little bit of moly paste on all of those contact surfaces that we polished. Some folks would swear by oil rather than using any sort of grease here, but I'm using such a light film that I don't believe it's going to make any difference no matter what the temperature is. A lot of folks avoid grease in cold weather. So here's that photograph I promised you. Go ahead and stop frame here, and that'll give you something to look at as you reassemble the trigger. So now we're going to put everything back together again. The spring gets dropped into the clamshell before the top half goes on. This is the adjusting screw spring and stud that sit just underneath that sear bar. Don't lose those. Put that in place before you replace the top half of the clamshell. There's an Allen screw that'll get screwed in later on. Replace the 2 screws that hold the clamshell together. Okay, now we're going to run that Allen screw in, and that's a trigger pull weight adjusting screw there. The more you back that out, the less weight there'll be on that first stage of the, not first stage, but second stage of the trigger. You'll notice I only put it in about 2 full turns. Now we're going to lubricate the spring with some light spring tar. This you can purchase from ARH, or Air Rifle Headquarters. Good stuff to have on the bench if you do this sort of thing a lot. Alright, now it's time to reassemble the rifle. We'll put the trigger and spring group back into the gun. Set it down on the bench, and we'll put a little downward pressure on it as we get that larger of the 2 pins installed. A few taps with the hammer and it should seat it down well enough. And then we'll get it all the way in. And now it's time for that second pin. All right, the only thing left to do is to put the action back into the stock. When you do that, you won't be able to put the trigger guard back on until you remove the screw that allows you to adjust that Rowan trigger forward and aft. Important. Once the gun has been completely reassembled, it is strongly advised that a drop test be performed. If you're not sure how to perform a drop test, you are not qualified to attempt this procedure.
Okay, so we went ahead and installed that Rowan trigger. We polished all of the bearing surfaces of the trigger group, so hopefully this will make a difference. Now it's time for the big test. I've already gone ahead and cocked the rifle and loaded up a pellet, and now we're going to go ahead and test this trigger pull and see what we get. Alright, shot number 1. Now remember, this was over 3 pounds. 12 ounces, not even 1 pound. We'll do 2 more, we'll take an average. But that's pretty impressive. Once we're done testing the trigger pull, I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of shots just by aiming at a target. It's just so I can get a feel for the trigger and see if we eliminated that creep. Because that's a biggie. I'd really like to see that gone. Alright, shot number 2. .1 ounces. I'm not sure if that was a fluke, but that's a pretty light pull. But I like a very light pull. I like it to be under a pound on a gun like this, where I'm trying to be real precise to shoot it. If it was a sporting gun, I can handle 3, even 4 pound trigger pull. But for a gun like this, when I'm trying to shoot as tight a group as I can shoot, I mean, a 3 or 4 pound pull is just not good. Alright, shot number 3. .8 ounces. Let's do 1 more. This one's .177 caliber, which makes it real fumbly to load for me. In fact, it's downright difficult to load. But I can put up with that as long as the gun shoots good. So, shot number 4. .8 ounces. We do an average on that, we get 10.9 ounces. That's a 10 ounce, 11 ounce trigger. That is fantastic. That is exactly what I was hoping for, just to lighten that trigger pull up. Now I'm going to go ahead and see if the creep is still there by pulling that trigger with my trigger finger. And I can't wait to put some trigger time behind this gun now. Let's just see if the creep is gone. Beautiful first stage, nice hard wall. Zero creep, unbelievable. What a difference. What a fantastic trigger that we've got now. It's like night and day. I can't tell you how much difference it is between the way it was before we started on this project and the way it is now. It's fantastic. So we'll try one more time, see if that's still going to give me no creep. Oof, that is beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. So we got what we were hoping for. We eliminated the creep and we got the pull weight down to a very manageable 11 ounces. So I'd say that's fantastic. And with that in mind, we're going to celebrate and ring that bell. I hope. Let's see if we can hit that bell on this windy afternoon. Oh yeah, first try. I want to thank you folks for stopping by the Pellets and Pistons Airgun channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and by all means hit that bell if you'd like to be reminded of future videos. Thanks again folks, and have a great day.